Indiana is officially out of the NCAA tournament, missing it for a second straight season. The end of the Mike Woodson era in Bloomington. Peegs.com's Jeff Rabjohns, Trevor Andershock. Jared Kelly here, just minutes after the selection show happened. Rabbi, I'll start with you. Indiana, one of the first teams out not to make the NCAA tournament. UNC, Xavier, both get in. Did that surprise you at all to begin with?
Well, I thought going into today, depending on what happened in the UAB game and what happened with VCU, I thought Indiana was right there, like on the cut line. Maybe a chance to be last one in, next to last one in, maybe first one out, second one out. But I thought they were right there, and part of this is their strength of schedule. As mentioned on the CBS broadcast, that North Carolina got in because of its non-conference strength of schedule. Whether that's fair or not, that's what was mentioned. So if that is what happened, then you look at Indiana's non-conference strength of schedule, and that's obviously a big question. And it actually goes back to we talked about this going into the battle for Atlantis, that it was really important since Indiana did not have any significant opponents scheduled in the normal non-conference. They needed to beat somebody of significance, like a Louisville, more thinking at that time Gonzaga, and they got smashed by Louisville, got smashed by Gonzaga. So that essentially gives them no help. They don't have any non-conference wins over a good team. South Carolina turned out to be awful. Providence turned out to be not very good, and IU even played them when they didn't have Bryce Hopkins. So that's a factor as well. But I think a lot of this was Indiana's non-conference schedule. Just no good wins. Everything in their non-conference, every game they won in non-conference was quad two, three, or four, and a lot of them were quad three and quad four. They 10 of their non-conference wins were quad three and four wins. So that doesn't do anything for you. And some people who have read what we've been writing throughout the season know this, but that's one of the things that comes into play. And I really think that was IU's undoing. Again, North Carolina brings in some questions, considering IU had more quad one wins. That's a very fair question to ask. But as far as why Indiana didn't get in, I think it came down to non-conference strength of schedule and too many wins over quad three and quad four teams, which again, those really don't help you.
Yeah, Trevor, I'll send the same thing over to you. Obviously, the big ones here are UNC and Xavier. Both teams with just one quad one win. Indiana has four quad one wins. Uh, do you look at it as in, the quantity of the wins, or, you look at the other side where UNC, first of all, their AD is the chairman of the selection committee. So, we'll see how much that ultimately plays in. But also, UNC played some teams close that were good. They ultimately lost those games, but they were able to play a lot of close games where as Indiana got blown out in a lot of the games that, the higher tier games they played this year.
Yeah, I mean, I was absolutely shocked that the committee would take a UNC team. I believe they were 6-12 in the ACC, somewhere along those lines. And it's a down conference this year. Only get with North Carolina four teams in. You had three really solid teams in the NCAA tournament from the ACC. So to pick them over IU just absolutely surprised me. Obviously we use a bracket matrix to kind of aggregate, over 100 bracketologists, and no one had North Carolina in. So that came as an absolute surprise. I think, like we were saying, Bubba Cunningham being the UNC athletic director and the chairman of the committee, even if he can't be in the room while discussing North Carolina, those people still have to face him once he comes back into the room. It's not like that magically disappears. So there's definitely some weight there. So that surprised me. And then Xavier getting in, I thought that was another shock. I thought really Xavier was on the outside looking in coming into today. I thought Boise State might have a better case than Xavier. But like Texas, obviously, I think they get in with their two SEC tournament wins over Vanderbilt and Texas A&M. So I thought that was fair to put them in. But getting back to IU and UNC, I really didn't think there was much of a contest between the two teams. Thought maybe both would make it, but I did not see them picking UNC over Indiana at this point.
I have bracket matrix here pulled up. I think as of this afternoon, they had 111 brackets tracked. Indiana was included in 90 of them. compared to UNC, who was in 27 out of the 111 brackets. Xavier was in 30 out of the 111. Texas was in 50 out of the 111. So, even a lot of these projections had Indiana getting in over some of these last four in teams. So, this is kind of shocking, pretty shocking, honestly. But Rabbi, you were one of the first ones to announce afterwards too that Indiana would not be participating in the NIT or the new Crown tournament. Just now that the season is over, and Indiana obviously is going to miss the NCAA tournament. Where does IU go from here?
Well, obviously, the focus turns, to the coaching search, which we've been covering extensively already on Peegs.com. And really, we've been discussing since I wrote it inside the locker room. I don't know, it was 2, 3 weeks before IU announced that Mike Woodson would retire, that announcing a retirement for Mike Woodson before the season was over was being discussed. So that's where the focus turns now. That and the portal. We'll start looking at, okay, who's going to stay, who's going to put their name in the portal. I certainly anticipate significant percentage, let's put it that way, of IU's players to enter the portal. Even if nothing else, give themselves the option. Doesn't mean they're definitely leaving. But like we saw with the last coaching change, pretty much everybody went in the portal. Then after a coaching hire was made, players made decisions. I certainly anticipate that happening again, at least for a significant portion of the IU players. Again, doesn't mean they're leaving, but I expect them to enter the portal. But that's where IU goes now. And I know some people were confused on social media about, well, the language for the Crown tournament says if selected, you have to play. Yeah, that's what it says. There are ways around it. And I've been told very clearly IU has no plans to play in the NIT, no plans to play in the Crown tournament. That with a coach who has already announced his retirement, the view from the university itself is it's time to move forward.
Rabbi, we talked about this behind the scenes, but if IU was forced to play in that Crown tournament, there was a chance they wouldn't have any players. I mean, everybody, like you're saying,
Yeah.
everybody would already be in the portal. So obviously, you could still play if you're in the portal, but most of them probably would sit out. Mike Woodson, I don't know if he would stick around to coach in the Crown. So you might have basically walk-ons and a few scholarship players and a new head coach playing in that tournament. So it makes all the sense in the world to get out of it and basically just wrap up the season here.
Yeah, and I think most people know this by now, but the Crown doesn't start until after the Elite Eight. It's a TV deal, and the idea is, okay, the Elite Eight ends on Sunday, create basketball to fill in the gap between the Elite Eight and the Final Four. Have games, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But that event does not start until 7 days after the portal opens. So who knows what rosters are going to look like? I don't know who they're going to actually have, but it could be that old Seinfeld line. What are we doing? We're cheering for laundry. You don't even know who the players are in the jerseys. You're just cheering for jersey. But we'll see what that looks like. But yeah, I mean, some of these teams. I mean, I don't know. You got 4 or 5 walk-ons out there. You got managers playing. I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen just for the sake of college basketball. But yeah, you're right. I mean, who knows who's on some of these teams 7 days after the portal opens? And a lot of these guys, if you're in the portal, your agent's not letting you play. Okay, it's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. I mean, that thing may or may not work out. It's a very odd event in a very odd time period in the college basketball postseason schedule.
Yeah, I think that the timing of it is what really does it in. There's no way people are sticking around to play in that deep in after the NCAA tournament. Most teams are done leading up to the Final Four. So I thought that timing in this area of the transfer portal just does not make sense.
No, no, it doesn't make sense. And you've got, I don't know how much. I mean, I think some people are aware of this, but I don't know how many people really understand. College basketball starts in June as far as practicing. Okay. So this is March. This is month number 10 in the actual practicing and playing schedule for these college basketball players. That is a grind. Okay. That is a real grind. They come in June, they have a summer program, they get a little time off before classes start. Then they start the fall workouts and everything. Then a lot of programs maybe give them a week off or something like that before formal practice starts. And formal practice leads right into the summer. right into the season, pardon me. But for a lot of these guys, they've been going at it for 10 months. I mean, the idea that you're going to get a bunch of high level players who didn't make the NCAA tournament to basically decide to practice for an additional 2 weeks and then all of a sudden go play in some random thing, I think that's hopeful. I love college basketball, so I'm going to be optimistic and hope the event all the best. But I think they're being awfully hopeful that that thing's going to work.
Yeah. You can see the way the winds are blowing too with those, postseason tournaments outside the NCAA with, Iowa's an open coaching job. Indiana, obviously, Minnesota's looking for a new coach. I believe Rutgers has already said they're not going to play postseason, Northwestern as well. So, I mean, you're looking at a Big Ten where, you might be scraping at the bottom of the barrel just to get any of those teams to agree to play to any of those games. So, it'll be interesting to see how long that crown tournament lasts. But Rabbi, I did want to turn our attention here to obviously we do have some finality now with the Mike Woodson era. The last 72 hours, Indiana was waiting to see if they were going to get in the tournament. Obviously, they are not. So the Mike Woodson era is over in Bloomington. We talked about this a little bit on our post game after the Oregon Big Ten tournament loss, but did you have any other thoughts on just reflecting on Woodson and the 4 years he had at Indiana?
No, I mean, I think it's something that we've covered very extensively now, especially going back to the Bahamas when people started really asking some pretty serious questions. And even in year three of the Woodson area, people were asking real questions because, Trace Jackson Davis was a pretty much a generational level talent. When you look at where he is in scoring, rebounding, block shots, you can make a very easy argument that he's a generational talent. And seeing somebody else show up like that at Indiana, play that well for 4 years, a McDonald's All American who stays for 4 years, very rare, especially one who's that productive. So, Trace covered up for a lot of things the first couple years. Jalen Hood-Schifino was a terrific get. He was obviously very impactful. But outside of that, the program never really, there wasn't a lot of great traction. It wasn't as if you looked at offensive efficiency and saw it, going up the ladder. In fact, it went down. There were some other things you can look at as far as, the analytics, and there wasn't anything you could point to and say, here's clear progress. There wasn't anything necessarily on the recruiting trail you could look at and say, here's clear progress. IU and Philly deserve credit for this, but he was the one who pointed out, and I double checked this. After landing Jalen Hood-Schifino, Indiana went 0 for 31 on nationally ranked guards and wings that they offered. So that's obviously a big red flag. And then in the portal, they were able to get some guys, but NIL certainly was a big, big factor in that. And you look at some guys from the state of Indiana they went after. Nelly Davis didn't get him. Ben Hummerkaus didn't get him. Connor Hickman didn't get him. Tony Perkins didn't get him. Those were at
Ryan
least
Conwell.
yet Ryan Conwell, yeah, who certainly was a very helpful player for Xavier, which is in the NCAA tournament. And you can look at those players; a whole bunch of them are in the NCAA tournament. They helped their teams. I know Connor Hickman got hurt, but when you look at coaching tenures as they progress, wins and losses are number one. But you also look and see, okay, if wins and losses aren't happening, are there other things that are clear improvements of a program? Maybe recruiting's really starting to get going, which was the case, Tom Crean's first 3 years. Wins didn't really come, 3 consecutive losing seasons. But by year three, you had Jordan Hulls on the roster. Everybody looked at him, good player. Christian Watford, same thing. They were in deep on Cody Zeller. They were in deep on Yogi Ferrell. There were clearly things that pointed toward the future is getting brighter. But I think one of the big problems with Mike Woodson's tenure was there weren't any clear, tangible evidences that there is improvement on concrete things that are sustainable. And I think that's really the big thing. Recruiting didn't go well. They became completely portal dependent. And even in the portal, they became heavily NIL dependent. You have to have NIL. You can't shop in certain talent stores. But, you also need some relationships on certain areas too. And then you have this year where the state of Indiana has 2 McDonald's All-Americans and Indiana doesn't get either one of them. Braylon Mullins goes to UConn. Jalen Harrelson goes to play for Mike Shrewsbury up at Notre Dame. So I think there were just a lot of some yellow flags. There were also some red flags. And at the end of the day, the Mike Woodson era really was, okay, Trace Jackson Davis carried him to a couple NCAA tournaments. when he was there. But Trace was the guy Archie Miller recruited. Okay. Archie Miller did not win enough. He got fired. It was fair. But he did leave IU Trace Jackson Davis. But outside of Trace's 2 years, it's really hard to point to IU doing anything of any real significance. I know they got a couple nice regular season wins here and there, sweeping Purdue the 1 year. Cool, great, nice, fun moments, wonderful moments. But singular moments that aren't stacked are not signs of significant progress. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what the Mike Woodson era was.
I do think missing the NCAA tournament this year really changes how you look at his overall tenure too. Because if he would have made it this year, it would have been 3 out of 4 years. Obviously, 2 of those years would have been a playing game, first four in Dayton. But now looking back, you won't have that gloss of making the NCAA tournament in 3 or 4 years. Now it's just 2 of 4. And like you said, Rabbi, those 2 years were with Trace Jackson Davis, an All American type. Once you lose him, you don't make the NCAA tournament in back-to-back years. So I thought today missing the NCAA tournament, really hurts his case that he should have been given, more time, a couple more year or year or more at IU to get it going more, since he would have made it in 3 or 4 years. But now missing it, I think that takes it totally away. There's really no gloss to it, no shine to it, if you will. And he ends up just making the NCAA tournament in the 2 years he had Trace Jackson Davis.
Trevor, if we're going to put a full stamp on the Woodson tenure, it should be noted too the bright spots. Obviously he developed Chloe Ware, a guy from Oregon, former five-star who a lot of people wrote off. Jalen Hood-Schifino, he got to come in. Even Malik Renew improved over his 3 seasons at IU. And obviously the improvements, on an individual player level wasn't, enough to get Indiana back to the tournament these last 2 years. But when you speak to, or can you speak to just sort of, the players that Indiana was able to produce under Mike Woodson?
Yeah, obviously getting Khalil Ware was huge. It's kind of a misnomer that, he didn't have any success at Oregon. He was a McDonald's All-American. He played well when given the opportunity to play at Oregon. Just Nate Biddle came back. He was injured early in the year, came back and kind of bumped Ware out of the rotation. So, his efficiency and, per minute production was good at Oregon. He just was not giving the playing time that he did at IU. So obviously it gives Mike Woodson some credit for seeing that it wasn't just his raw numbers at Oregon. It was the overall talent that he could use in a Mike Woodson system and have him excel. Now, obviously, one of the top rookies in the NBA after a year at IU. So a lot of credit goes there. Jalen Hood-Schifino was a great kid. Mount Verde connection comes in, freshman. A lot of hype around his NBA possibilities leading up to, that freshman year over the summer, leading into his freshman year. But then he has that magnificent game at Purdue, leading IU to victory. I think, what was it, 35 points, maybe somewhere in that range. It killed him in the mid range. And then kind of going back, just the overall high points, basically, of the Woodson tenure, you have to talk about his record against Purdue. Sweeping them that year, going 3-3 against Purdue, while Purdue had its best 4 year stretch in its history, and IU was still able to split with them, going, or was it 4-4? I guess, yeah,
4-4.
Yeah, with the split this year, 4-4, 3-3 before. So yeah, split the series with Matt Painter and Purdue. I think that has to be one of the top lines to the Mike Woodson tenure for the Hoosiers.
And I think we also got to give the staff a little bit of credit for some of those recruiting wins as well. Kenya Hunter's connections to Mount Verde were certainly very impactful. Kenya's connections led to Jalen Hood-Schifino. Jalen Hood-Schifino led to Malik Renew. Without Jalen Hood-Schifino, Malik Renew is not at Indiana. And then you see Rosemont did a good job with his connections down south. Really, really impactful in landing Khalil Ware. Got Miles Rice, Kenyon Carlisle this year. I know they didn't quite produce at the level of expectations, but those two guys did a really good job. And Brian Walsh too. At one point in time, he was able to get Liam McNeely to commit. McDonald's All-American, another Mount Verde guy. Commitment didn't stick. I realized that at the end of the day, doesn't matter. But those guys did do a lot of work during their tenure, and I think they should be acknowledged for the work that they put in.
And to jump in there, Walsh was very big in getting Trent Sisley to commit.
Yes.
While there's a lot of you know, not knowing if Mike Woodson would be back next year. Obviously, Trent Sisley is a senior this year. He's still committed to IU and Mike Woodson, and has relayed that he will stay with IU. Obviously has to see the next coach, but more than likely he wants to be an Indiana Hoosier. And I think Brian Walsh deserves a lot of credit of really hammering home the IU family and what it means to go to IU, even with the uncertainty of the head coaching position.
Wrapping us up here, Rabbi. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of roster movement, like you talked about here in the coming days. Could you see a scenario where it's a complete roster overhaul, where still similar to what Louisville, Kentucky did last year, where it's a completely new team? Are there guys you think could stay, through a coaching change? Obviously, not asking you to delve into speculation there, but where do you sort of see this at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think most likely a significant roster overhaul is highly likely. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. A new coach could come in and maybe talk some key guys into coming. But just because of the way certain guys came in, I think it's more likely that a number of guys want to go find new homes. So I don't know if it's going to be totally like Louisville, where you're talking 13 new scholarship players in year one. That might be a little bit of a surprise, but I think significant portion of the IU roster next year is going to be new, and I think that's why the portal is going to be big. And I think it's going to be a really really important portal season for Indiana. I totally agree with what Trevor says. Trent Sisley has every intention of being an Indiana Hoosier. Obviously, he's going to need to get to know the new coach. The new coach is going to need to decide that he wants Trent Sisley. But somebody averaging double figures and playing the way Trent Sisley has for a Montverde team that plays the competition they do, I can't see any coach come in and saying, I don't want that guy. So I'd expect Trent to be there. I think the math says you probably end up with some guys who stay. But my guess right now, as we sit here on Selection Sunday, is there's a lot of significant new pieces for Indiana when they start the next basketball season.
Yeah, just to jump in there real quick, I'd probably put the line at like 1.5 scholarship players back for next year. Obviously, we don't know
Yeah.
the new head coach, so that will play a huge factor into it. But a lot of these guys will just need a new start somewhere else, kind of rejuvenate their career, get out of Bloomington, get a change, and see if that really helps them. But I think it will be almost a completely new roster next year.
Yeah, it's gonna be it's gonna be an interesting next few weeks for Indiana as their 2024-25 season officially comes to an end. Also,
By,
March.
by the way, by the way, before we close, this is what happens when you're dealing with a coaching search and Selection Sunday. You drink coffee straight out of the big bottle. That's what life is like. You get up at 6 in the morning and you have one of these things every day.
I was
And
wondering
yes,
what
I,
that
yeah,
was.
yes, and yes, I want an NIL deal.
Uh, all right. Well, we'll have much more to come on the coaching search. Obviously, that is still going underway. So, Rabbi, you might not be getting some sleep for a while here till Indiana announces their new head man. But transfer portal going to be opening up here soon for Indiana as well. So, a lot more to come on Peegs.com. We got the hot board up. That should be getting updated here in the next week or so. So, if you need anything on the coaching search, on the transfer portal roster movement, we will have it all over on Peegs.com. But that will do it for the 2024-25 Indiana men's basketball season. We'll have much more to come on Peegs.com. Jeff Rabjohns, Trevor Anderson, Jerry Kelly. See folks over on the site.